Hi, welcome back to another edition, another episode of Colors in the Void. And we're going to continue our discussion, the 30th anniversary of Fall 1995, just an incredible tour. Last episode, we talked about October 95, culminating in the Halloween show on 10/31/95. Just an amazing show, an amazing run up to that show. The performances, again, starting on the 19th of October all the way through, were just really high energy, impressive. But this episode, we're going to talk about November '95. Essentially, the band took 8 or 9 days off after Halloween, and then they regrouped and got back on tour on the 9th of November at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, Georgia. So the tour resumes in the Southeast in Atlanta on a 3-night run, November 9th, 10th, and 11th. And they had previously played Fox Theater the previous spring, April 23rd, 1994. And I myself was a little bit confused because I thought they had played the Fox Theater in Atlanta back in '93, but that was actually the Roxy. So I confirmed that the other day. So just there probably are some fans out there like me who was confused about the Fox versus the Roxy. So yeah, this was their second run of shows here at the Fox Theater in Atlanta, and they really picked up where they left off in Chicago, in Rosemont, Illinois. They were just flying, and I just want to start off by saying the Bathtub Gin from the 9th of November is just an incredible version, and again sets the bar really high for them, and I wasn't that familiar with that particular version or the Fox run in particular until 2018. When Phish was planning a festival in upstate New York. They were having issues with water. They had to cancel the festival right at the last moment. And Kevin Shapiro still played his From the Archives, and that's the first time I really got to hear that Bathtub Gin, and it just blew me away. I couldn't believe how good it was. So I highly recommend that version. It's one of the best versions from that fall tour, and there'll be other versions we'll talk about, especially in the coming months, in December '95 specifically. But the Fox Gin, it's just a monster, and it really is. The jam sort of morphs into something completely new and different, and Mike is playing incredible bass, and it almost sounds like what they would sound like, in 3 or 4 years, sort of a foreshadow of their future funk, house and ambient styles, if you will. But just a great jam, and I highly recommend that. I did a lot of listening over the last few weeks. Really hit every show. There's this great website. I'm able to essentially download every show, every source that's available, and then I kind of cherry pick through the best source. I have high quality headphones, and so I'll download 6 or 7 shows and then pick what I feel like is the best sounding show. So it's that part of it's been really fun too. I now have just an incredible archive of now October and November '95 on my hard drive, and I'll do the same for December. So that part of it's been fun too with this project. But I want to jump right into the music. And I'm going to be kind of bouncing all over the place. I'm not going to talk about the month of November chronologically necessarily. So I'm going to be kind of jumping around. So we've talked about the Fox Gin, which is incredible. So I again, I built a playlist from the fall of '95, songs that just stuck out to me that I really enjoyed. And so the opener for this month for me is The Dinner and a Movie from Charleston, South Carolina, recorded on the 18th of November. Just an incredible high energy version. It hadn't been played going back, I don't know, 60 something shows. It hadn't been played since '94, and really sets the bar for that show. I mean, it's just an incredible version. There's a lot of energy in the room. So that kind of kicks off my playlist. Really enjoy that particular version of Dinner and a Movie. So we've touched base on the gin. And then the second track on my list is from a really, really high energy version of Llama from the 12th of November. And this is this is their fourth show in a row, and they just come out guns blazing in the first set. Really a nice version of Llama from Gainesville, Florida. And just like they did in the fall of '94, Phish played 4 shows in Florida. So they went from Atlanta and then to Gainesville, Florida on the 12th. They had a day off. They played in Orlando on the 14th, Tampa on the 15th, and then ended their Florida run on the 16th of November at West Palm Beach before migrating up the East Coast with the next show starting in Charleston, South Carolina. But that Llama from Gainesville is a really, really smoking version. I definitely recommend that. I love hearing longer jams. Their sort of their bread and butter pieces, if you will. And again, David Bowie stuck out like it did in October. It continued to expand in November as well. And just like in October, Bowie had these. Not every version, but most versions had these long sort of intros. With Fishman's Ride, which is, again, it's like the Pavlonian TikTok that Phish fans crave when we hear that. But some of the intros were extended on the 11th of November, the 16th, and the longest intro was on the 21st of November in Winston-Salem, and that one ran almost 5 minutes, 4 minutes and 55 seconds. So pretty cool. There were some other great versions of David Bowie, though, in November. The 16th, again, I mentioned. And the 21st, again, in Winston-Salem. Had to Take Me to the River. They played that for a few minutes. But the jam afterwards was pretty exploratory. I really enjoyed that. One of the most underrated versions of Bowie, I thought, from this month was the 11th of November from Fox. It's very experimental. It's not on the jam chart, so I feel like it's probably, again, under the radar, but it's a great jam. It covers a lot of ground, and they do a lot of interesting things there. But overall, another solid month for Bowie. So it was definitely fun hearing those versions. The next song on my track list from this month was Fast Enough for You from Tampa, Florida on the 15th of November. They played the Sun Dome in Tampa, which isn't a typical venue for them. We imagine them playing in a giant dome, but I'm sure they just had parts of it, cordoned off just for this show. But a pretty strong show, especially on the heels of Orlando, which was a live Phish release. I feel like Tampa probably isn't as famous, but it certainly deserves recognition. And so one song that really stuck out for me in the first set of Tampa was Fast Enough for You. Just a really gorgeous version, almost like, a great Gulf of Mexico sunset. Trey is painting opaque colors with his Languedoc with really nice pitch bends and sustain, just like we heard in 93 and 94. Trey is just playing some really beautiful lead guitar. The next song on my track list, and this was the fourth version of the tour, but Ha 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 from the 30th of November in Dayton, Ohio. And this one was interesting in that it had a little bit of a Trey outro solo, not super long, but they were getting comfortable enough with it where they were starting to just tool around with it a little bit. I mean, it's usually just a minute or 2 minutes long. It's not like something they would jam out, but you could kind of feel that they were getting more comfortable with it. And it's interesting to note that they played 2 versions of Ha 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 on each month of the tour, 2 versions in October, 2 in November, and then 2 again in December. So this was the 4th version. The 29th of November in Nashville, which also featured a 6-song sit-in with Bella Fleck, featured a really nice Reba, and there were numerous versions of Reba. I love Reba. I love, and specifically when it comes to 1995, I love the Lowell, Massachusetts version. I really wish Shapiro would release Lowell as a live Phish archive pick, because I just think it's just incredible. Great version. So many debuts: Free, Glide, Spock's Brain, right? But the Reba play that night was pretty amazing, and 95 was a great year for Reba, and the Nashville Reba really reinforces that idea. And just, going back to the sit-in with Bela, they played a brief, minute or two of Heart and Soul, a Broadway tune. And Bela is just an incredible banjo player. I saw a video of him recently with Rick Bateo, who does a lot of interviews with different musicians, not just guitar players, mostly stringed instruments, although, but the interview with Bela, Bela, he had his banjo. I highly recommend the interview with Rick Bateo. He's amazing. Obviously he's a banjo player, and he talks about when he first started learning to play banjo, and he opened it up. He learned all the modes, and he's taken banjo to the next level. He's taken the music, like people have this sort of stereotypical view of banjo players. Yeah, they're just going to play bluegrass. Obviously it's a bluegrass instrument, but Bela, he traced the instrument's roots back to Africa, and his playing is just so wide open. I saw a video of him playing on the Grammys. He covers a version of Rhapsody in Blue on the banjo. He's amazing. So I highly recommend taking a deep dive into Bela Fleck. So it's nice to hear him sit in with Phish in Nashville, and they play an incredible version of Slave to the Traffic Light at the end of that show. Stash continued to light up the stage in November. 5 really great versions, and probably the most famous is the one from Orlando on the 14th of November. And again, it's a live Phish download. I first heard the Orlando Stash. I think it was from the Lemon Wheel from the archives. Shapiro played a version, played that version of Stash on his archive show at the Lemon Wheel. That's when I first heard it. And for the longest time, it didn't really, I'm more in tune with the shorter versions, a good 10 to 15 minute barn burner. We talked about the version from Vancouver last month. We talked about the version from Austin. And there were some other great versions. And again, it continued in November. But the 14th November version, Orlando, really sticks out. And my favorite parts were after Mantucca, they get into this kind of cool descending jam. And they go through Dogface Boy. Then there's a sort of an ambient period, an ambient jam, and Fishman really takes over. This is sort of they're outside of Stash, they're outside of the chord progression that we typically hear. They're not doing a lot of tension and release in this particular segment. It's more of an ambient jam. But Page is playing very well. Fishman hints at 2001. Mike has a very almost a cyborg tone on his bass. Phish is adding, and to me this ambient section really is all about John Fishman. He's playing some really nice stuff there. So I highly recommend. And again, this is the 3 or 4 or 5 minutes before they segue back into Stash proper, before they do the outro. But for me, that was really the highlight of that Orlando version, was that sort of ambient jam towards the end. It's just amazing. Some other great versions, again, from November 11th and then the 19th as well. So just another solid month for Stash. And then likewise, another first set barn burner that we always hear in the first set is Maze. I didn't talk a lot about Maze last month in October. There were some great versions, but it continues to heat up as we head in towards the end of the year. Again, going back to the 14th of November, just an incredible version, and they use Maze to kick off the second set. Just an incredible. Trey's solo in that is just, they had the day off the day before, the 13th of November, and they come out guns blazing on the 14th. So I definitely recommend that version. The second set obviously is highly recommended, but a really solid version of Maze in Orlando. Going back to Tampa, Phish played an amazing version of Split Open and Melt on the 15th. A lot of great versions, but this one really stuck out to me. I don't know why. They were just locked in. Sometimes you'll hear that with Melt. You'll hear different versions over a tour. Some stick out more than others. This version definitely sticks out. Another song that I thought was kind of interesting this tour was The Wolfman's Brother from Hampton on November 25th. This was not the Wolfmans that we would hear in the spring of '97 or even late '96, but you can tell they're getting more comfortable with it. There is a little bit more funk guitar, so that version definitely sticks out. And then the Lizards from Dayton, Ohio, really has a triumphant feel, because they were literally just picking up steam heading into December, and that song always gets the crowd moving quickly. So I want to segue into some of my second set highlights from November '95, and I feel like one of the underrated shows from November is the November 22nd show from Landover, Maryland, at US Air Arena. The set starts off with an aborted version of Rift. Fishman was having trouble, but they go right into Free. And it had been a while since I've heard this version of Free. I was really impressed. Probably around the 14th, 15 minute, the jam sort of breaks away from the free space. They go into some sort of ambient waters. It almost sounds like the Nirvana section in Yem, but really creative. And then towards the end of the version, Fishman again gets sort of a drum solo spotlight, if you will. But this version of Free and the version of Stash that we talked about earlier, to me, kind of are throwbacks to Fall '94. Fall '94, they played monstrous versions of David Bowie and Tweezer, and they did that in the summer of '95 as well. But they didn't do a lot of they didn't do a lot of that sort of open-ended jamming in the fall of '95. Things were a little more reeled in. But the version of Free from Landover and the Orlando Stash definitely are throwbacks to the fall of '94. But this version of Free is very special. And I feel like the Landover second set in particular is sort of underrated. You've got a pretty high energy version of You Enjoy Myself. Trey's solo is just off the rails, so I definitely recommend that show. Tweezer again had another great month in November, just like it did in October. The Dayton, Ohio version is pretty famous. That's available on Live Phish as a download. Has just a great beginning jam. It's sort of iconic. The version from Gainesville was pretty cool. There was like a pretty cool middle jam in there. And then another cool version of Tweezer that I thought stuck out was from the 19th of November in Charlotte. And that one they really lock into a funk groove. And again, it goes back to, you can hear that Medeski, Martin, and Wood influence, certainly in that jam, I thought. So that was kind of cool. Again, we're in the second set here on my playlist, and Mike's song continues to impress in November, just like it did in October. And I love the Hampton, the 25th of November Hampton version. They do a rotation jam, but the opening of that Mike's is really solid before they do the instrument switch. They just rage it. I mean, just really cool. And in the fall of '94, in 1994, they would play Mike's, and more times than not, they would segue into simple, right? They would do this jam in F major. On this tour, instead of they would slam into F, but they wouldn't necessarily jump right into simple, right? And so the Mike song is a standalone from Winston-Salem on the 21st. They go into this really impressive jam in F major, again, same key as simple. But it's just a gorgeous jam. I mean, it's just, if you're familiar with that jam, and if you're not, I recommend it. Again, from the 21st November, the Mike song. The second jam is gorgeous. It's some of the most poignant music I've heard them play in that month, on that tour, in that year. It's just a great version. And from Tampa, Florida, again, features a pretty cool jam, and it gets kind of ambient towards the outro. And Fishman's guitar, one of the Trey's guitar, one of the big effects that he had on the fall of '95 was the Leslie. So he's sort of noodling as the jam gets more ambient, and you can hear for a few bars he's teasing silent in the morning, because the music's very, very sort of quiet and ambient. So that was kind of an interesting touch by Trey. And then going back to the Hampton version, when they finally get through the rotation jam, they get back into Mike's song proper, and I like the jam. The second, in this instance, it's the third part where they re-enter back into Mike's song. But what sticks out for me, it's like, and I've never heard this. I haven't heard this in any version since then. They do the outro jam, but it's very, to me, it sounds very consonant and optimistic, almost triumphant. And they were probably feeling that after their first ever rotation jam. Maybe the rotation jam wasn't the greatest, but they pulled it off. And so I feel like that triumphant feeling that you hear in the Mike song from Hampton, the outro, is in celebration of that. Possum is a song that got played a lot in November, and a lot of great versions, honestly. And the version from Nashville is just, it's wild. There were times when I'm listening to it and I just had to stop. I mean, it was just so wild and so all over the place. And many great versions from November. You Enjoy Myself continued. At this point, they're playing You Enjoy Myself a lot, and it continues to be a great vehicle for them. Again, I listen to every version. I thought it was interesting, on the 29th of November, during their Nirvana section, there's some dog whistling, right? Kind of like what we heard in the 12/29/94 David Bowie. And they did dog whistling again in the free jam from Landover. I forgot to mention that. So it's kind of interesting that they're doing dog whistling during the Nirvana. Trey, there's some light chatter from Trey underneath. And they're still implementing these scary effects from Halloween. So, even though Halloween's over, they're in a new month, heading into December, right? A different holiday, if you will, but they're still playing with these scary effects, which I think are pretty cool. The version of You Enjoy Myself from the 29th of November is interesting in that Trey doesn't take his guitar solo. He lets Page, we typically would hear Page do an organ solo during the Tramp segment where Mike and Page are jumping on their trampolines. In this version, for whatever reason, Trey decides not. He doesn't want a solo, so Page gets some extra playing on his piano. We can't talk about You Enjoy Myself without mentioning the 18th of November, going back to Charleston, the Brickhouse Jam. Just an incredible jam. Kind of harkens back to the Halloween You Enjoy Myself. It's got that dirty funk, and Trey sings some of the lyrics, but it's really, really good. I highly recommend it. Again, I mentioned the Landover Yem because Trey just has an incredible high energy outro solo. There's some sick bass and drums from the 11th of November, some of the better ones that I've heard, and that's coming out of they do a Crossroads jam in the November 11th version. Pretty cool. So overall, another really impressive month for You Enjoy Myself in November. And just like Mike's song, Week of Paw Groove had some great versions in November as well. The 11th of November, just some really good funk. I had my notes here, 97, Hold My Beer, because the funk was so strong and back in the fall of '95. And again, another funky version. 4 days later in Tampa at the Sun Dome, they were just all over it. So I've talked about that Tampa show a lot. I think it would be a great live Phish release. Again, it is overshadowed by the previous night in Orlando, but Tampa can definitely hold its own against most shows. It's interesting to point out that the Phish continued their chess game in the month of October. I believe they won the band won the first game. They won the chess match on the at the Tampa show, and then they started a new game of chess in West Palm. And the West Palm Beach show is interesting. No real jam highlights necessarily, but 2 sit-ins, one with Butch Trucks for Possum, and there's a legendary story that he was playing the rhythm to One Way Out, pretty much the whole song, and I think Trey teases One Way Out a few times. And then in the encore at West Palm, Phish had the opportunity to have Jimmy Buffett on stage for their version of Brown Eyed Girl, which I thought was kind of fun. Especially Jimmy Buffett, he sings a few ecological lines. He mentions the manatees, and he mentions some other stuff. But I thought that was cool. Like even back then, 30 years ago, that Jimmy's singing about protecting the wildlife and nature in Florida, down there in West Palm. So just another incredible month of live Phish. You guys just. Again, they start off in Atlanta, they do their Florida run, they head up to Charleston, and then they just start chugging up the East Coast. And they continue to put down some incredible shows, culminating in the Dayton show, which again is a live Phish release, before they travel on to Hersheytown and start the month of December on December 1st. So again, just, I recommend listening to all the shows. I feel like every show has at least 1 or 2 highlights. And again, a perfect example is the Fast Enough for You from Tampa. I mean, it's just a beautiful version, incredible. So that concludes this episode, guys. Just a little bit of a preview. It's going to be, some newer episodes will be coming up shortly. Phish released another archive release, December 28th, 1990. And I got on board with Phish, like I mentioned previous episodes, in early 94. So a lot of my listening began in 93, 94, that era. I have some favorite early shows as well, and specifically from 1990, I believe it's November 4th there's a show in Colorado, and I can't remember if it's Fort Collins or it's a town out there, but just an incredible show. They play one of my favorite versions of Caravan, the Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn jazz classic. So I'm probably gonna listen to that at some point, and we'll review that one, guys. Again, because it's not the era of Phish that I'm most familiar with. So I'm interested to hear what they sound like. They're playing at this club called the Marquee in Manhattan. John Popper sits in. Someone mentioned that the Club Marquee its location is sort of near where the High Line is now. So it's kind of an interesting history. If you know Manhattan, if you know where the High Line is, that's where they were playing that night. Also, I'm expecting my copy of Undermined in the mail probably this week. So we'll be reviewing that as well. Pretty excited to hear that. And I'll probably go back and listen to the Headphones Jam. I haven't heard it in a while, but the Headphones Jam is a sprawling 30-40 minute jam that was recorded in the barn when they were recording sessions for Undermined. So I recommend that as well. And then we will continue this fall of 1995 review. We'll talk about December, the 2.5 weeks from December 1st up through the 17th of December, and then they take almost 2 weeks off before they hit the New Year's run with 2 shows in Worcester and then at Madison Square Garden. So we'll hit those as well. I'll combine the December shows and the New Year's into one into one episode. So that's just a little preview of what's coming ahead on Colors in the Void. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any comments about November, your favorite jams in November, feel free to leave those in the comments as well. Okay, that wraps it up for today, guys. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks. Have a great day.